Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Thursday, October 2nd, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today: Israel to treat Gaza City civilians as terrorists. So Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz on Wednesday issued a threat to Palestinian civilians in famine-stricken Gaza City, warning that they have their last opportunity to leave the besieged city and that they will be treated as terrorists if they remain. Katz said this in a post on X. He said that the IDF has almost entirely encircled Gaza City. He said, quote, "This is the last opportunity for Gaza residents who wish to do so now to move south and leave Hamas terrorists isolated in Gaza City itself, facing the IDF's ongoing operations at full force. Those who remain will be considered terrorists and terror supporters," end quote. So as we've been covering, Israel's goals for Gaza City involve cleansing it of its Palestinian population and destroying it completely, razing every building to the ground. And the IDF has claimed that more than 780,000 civilians have already fled the city. Other estimates put the number around 400,000. So not clear exactly how many have actually fled. And the estimate before the offensive started in early August was that there was more than 1 million Palestinian civilians in Gaza City. So either way, whether it's 400,000, 700,000 who have left, hundreds of thousands of civilians remain in Gaza City. And many of them are not going to leave for a few reasons. One of them is that a lot of them are malnourished and sick and just cannot handle another displacement. It could be a death sentence for them. There's also the fact that they're still bombing central and southern Gaza. Just yesterday, I covered that they bombed a tent in Al Mawasi, the camp that they're telling them all to flee to. They're actually bombing that same camp, and they killed a family of people who just had left Gaza City earlier this month. So it's, civilians are going to stay, and a lot of them are going to remain. And Katz is basically saying, well, we're going to exterminate everybody, all of you. And among the civilians who are staying are the Christians, the small remnant Christian population that remains in Gaza. The estimate is that there's about 600 Christians in Gaza, most of them based at the two churches, the Holy Family Catholic Church and the St. Porphyrius Orthodox Church, where they've been sheltering. And the priests and the nuns who are at these churches have said that they're not going to leave because the people sheltering there, they're sick and elderly and disabled people, and they need their help. Some of them are Muslims. I know when Israel bombed the St. Porphyrius Church back in October 2023, right at the beginning of this, they killed Muslims and Christians. So this is, these people are staying, and they're not going to go. And again, this is such a small Christian community that if they're forced out and they, destroy the churches or wipe out this community, then that's it for the Christians in Gaza. And so this is, this goes on. And as I said, we'll get more into this in the story about kind of the daily violence in Gaza, but just heavy attacks continue in central and southern Gaza. So there's just no reason for these people to believe that they would be any safer if they moved to the south. You see this picture here is from Wednesday of Palestinians on the road fleeing the north. All right, so the next one here, Gaza Flotilla updates, IDF boards boats. So this is from Al Jazeera again, doing the live updates. So the flotilla boats have begun to be boarded by the IDF forces near Gaza as they get closer to Gaza. And the Israeli Foreign Ministry put out a video of Greta Thunberg. They have like kind of an obsession with her. She was on one of the first boats that was captured. And so some of the boats have been boarded, and others are, as I understand it right now, I'm recording this around 11 p.m. on the East Coast here in the U.S. And let's see what some of the latest live updates are. But these are there's a lot of protests around the world in response to Israel stopping this attempt to bring aid to the starving Palestinians in Gaza. Israeli forces say that have detained more than 200 people in the flotilla from 37 countries. That's according to the spokesman for the global Sumud flotilla. And there was about 500 people on all the different boats. So they haven't gotten everybody yet. Some of them are still headed toward Gaza as recording this. So we'll see, and I'll write something on it tomorrow. But I just wanted to leave the live updates because this story is gonna develop and change throughout the night. Sorry if I'm just scrolling through here. So the global Sumud flotilla, this was about an hour ago, reports that 13 vessels have been intercepted and that 30 are still en route to reach the coast of the war-torn territory of Gaza with aid for starving Palestinians. The group said, quote, "The illegal interceptions won't deter us. We continue on our mission to break the siege and open a humanitarian corridor," end quote. So again, we'll cover this tomorrow. All right, so the next one here, Israeli forces kill 73 more Palestinians in Gaza. So Israeli forces killed at least 73 Palestinians in Gaza on Wednesday, medical sources told Al Jazeera, as relentless U.S.-backed Israeli attacks continued despite the talk of a potential ceasefire deal. The majority of the people killed on Wednesday died in Gaza City as the IDF continues its campaign that aims, as I mentioned, to cleanse the city and destroy it. The Associated Press reported that 2 Israeli strikes hit a school sheltering displaced Palestinians in Gaza City, killing at least 7 people, including first responders. It looked like it was one of their double tap strikes that kills rescue workers. 5 Palestinians were also killed when they were targeted by an Israeli strike while gathered around a water tank. That's just a very small sample of the violence that happened in Gaza City on Wednesday. And this picture is actually from central Gaza, this bombing. There was a strike on a tent on the hospital grounds that killed 1 person in central Gaza. Let's see what else. Another shelling in central Gaza killed at least 4 people, including 2 children. And the health ministry reported that there are 2 more starvation deaths due to the Israeli siege, the famine caused by the Israeli siege. So Palestinians continue to starve to death. And I think it's safe to say that the health ministry's malnutrition death numbers are certainly an undercount. We'll actually get more into that in the next one. But the daily horror goes on despite this talk of this ceasefire deal, this proposal that the U.S. and Israel presented. The update on that is basically Hamas is going over it, and the reports are saying that they want clarifications on and some stronger guarantees on certain things. And Qatar has said that some things still need to be negotiated since Israel made all those changes. And the question is, if they try to negotiate any of those points, are Netanyahu and Trump just going to say, "Oh, that's it, no deal"? Then we'll see. All right, so the next one here: U.S. doctors who worked in Gaza to Trump cut off aid to Israel. So a group of 152 American healthcare workers who have volunteered in Gaza signed an open letter to President Trump calling on him to cut off all military and diplomatic support for Israel's genocidal campaign against the Palestinian population of the besieged territory. So just a warning, this story, some of the details that they share about their time in Gaza is rough. I mean, these are the witnesses from America. They haven't let international journalists in, and the Americans that have gone over there, this is what they see. And the picture here in this story is rough as well, of some children who were killed earlier back in September. So many of the healthcare workers who signed the letter have served in other conflict zones around the world, but they said that the scale of violence directed at Gaza civilians is unlike anything they have ever seen. They described in the letter the atrocities they witnessed, including the massive violence inflicted on children. So this is from the letter, quote, "Half of Gaza's population is children, and we routinely treated them for every possible type of injury: 100% total body surface area burns, dismemberment, gunshots to the head and chest, evisceration, decapitation. We have even seen these injuries in fetuses whose mothers' bodies could not protect their unborn children from the American-made bombs dropped on them by Israeli forces. Most of us saw preteen children shot in the head or chest on a regular basis, often multiple times per day. Today, we beg you to hear the cries of Gaza's children that our consciences will not let us forget. We cannot fathom why our government continues arming Israel while its armed forces kill children en masse. End quote. The letter says that the healthcare workers who have been in Gaza since the establishment of the U.S.-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation have treated many Palestinians attacked by Israeli forces while attempting to get food. Excuse me, sorry. So the letter says, quote, whenever any GHF site opens, the day's events are entirely predictable. Within 1 hour, the nearest hospitals will be flooded with hundreds of wounded aid seekers. Each one of these mass casualty events instantly overwhelmed the already massively overcrowded and under-resourced facilities. Many patients are dead on arrival or have injuries that are beyond the capabilities of Gaza's healthcare system. End quote. The healthcare workers called the GHF a humanitarian abomination and said that it was a uniquely cruel tool of coercion. The letter also details the widespread disease and malnutrition in Gaza. It says, quote, today, virtually everyone in Gaza is visibly malnourished. We watched our own colleagues lose consciousness at work from malnutrition and dehydration, eating virtually nothing as they gave all available sustenance to their children, end quote. The letter also warns that the number of malnutrition deaths released by the Gaza Health Ministry is likely a huge undercount, noting that the number of starvation cases reported by the medical system in a humanitarian crisis is usually less than 10% of the true number of deaths caused by starvation. So that's less than 10% of the real number is what they're saying is the typical case for a humanitarian crisis, what's being reported in medical facilities. So the healthcare workers also addressed Israel's systematic destruction of hospitals in Gaza and attacks on healthcare workers, and they rejected the IDF's justification for the campaign against medical infrastructure. The letter says, quote, the 152 signatories to this letter spent more than 460 weeks inside Gaza's hospitals and clinics. We wish to be clear, not once did any of us see any type of Palestinian militant activity in any of Gaza's hospitals or other healthcare facilities. We urge you to see that Israel has systematically devastated Gaza's entire healthcare system and targeted our colleagues for torture, disappearance, and murder on an unprecedented scale, not because it was militarily necessary, but in order to destroy the system's abilities to save lives, end quote. The healthcare workers concluded the letter by calling for all restrictions on aid and medical supplies entering Gaza to be lifted, and with another appeal for Trump to end support for Israel. The letter says, quote, every day that we continue supplying weapons and munitions to Israel is another day that men and women are shredded by our bombs and children are murdered with our bullets. Another day that children starve in their helpless mother's arms. President Trump, we urge you, end this madness now, end quote. And I really think I've said this before, like the testimony of doctors, and not just the Western or American doctors, but the testimony of what we've heard from doctors and healthcare workers in Gaza, the things that they see, the pictures and the videos that come out of the hospitals. I mean, it's going to be the best evidence in the future of, when people look back and say, oh, yeah, it was very clear what was happening in Gaza. You don't shoot toddlers in the head on a regular basis. You don't shoot toddlers in the heart. It's on accident. You don't kill people trying to get food every single day, unless you think they're, animals not worthy of basic, necessities to live. It's just, it's just so the atrocities are just so horrible. And shout out to Dr. Feroz Sidwa, who I interviewed once before. About his time in Gaza. He was the one who led this letter. This is their third letter, that open letter that they've released, and they usually get a lot of media coverage, but so far it just goes on. All right, so the next one here, Trump gives security guarantee to Qatar. So this is an interesting story here. President Trump has signed an executive order pledging to provide Qatar with a security guarantee similar to NATO's Article 5. A step that came after Israel bombed the country, which is a major regional ally of the U.S. and hosts about 10,000 troops. Trump's order says that the U.S. shall, quote, regard any armed attack on the territory, sovereignty, or critical infrastructure of the state of Qatar as a threat to the peace and security of the United States. The U.S. shall take all lawful and appropriate measures, including diplomatic, economic, and, if necessary, military, to defend the interests of the United States and of the state of Qatar to restore peace and stability, end quote. The order marks the first time an Arab country is receiving such a strong security guarantee from the U.S., something that Saudi Arabia has long sought. And Axios had a quote from a former U.S. official that I thought was kind of funny. The official said, quote, Saudi Arabia thought that to get a defense pact with the United States, it would require normalizing relations with Israel. Qatar managed to get a partial defense pact with the United States by getting attacked by Israel, end quote. So according to the White House, the order was signed on Monday, September 29th, the same day that Trump hosted Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and had him apologize to Qatar's Prime Minister for the strikes on Doha, which killed 6 people, including 5 low-level Hamas officials and 1 Qatari security officer. And this was a photo that the White House released of Netanyahu on the phone. Trump's got the phone in his lap. But Netanyahu has it. It's a corded phone, which you don't see too often these days. And then it looks like Netanyahu's reading off a script here. And I think, a lot of, I want to say like this whole kind of thing that Trump made Netanyahu do. Obviously, they do want to preserve the relationship with Qatar, but I think some of this might be a response to what we've seen, like Tucker Carlson saying, like he said recently that Netanyahu's been going around telling people that he has the U.S. in his pocket, he has Trump in his pocket. I really do think Trump and his people are aware of like what Tucker and other people are saying. But anyway, so and then the claim is the story is that the U.S. was not aware of the plan to bomb Qatar. According to Israeli officials, though, Netanyahu called Trump before the attack happened, and there was enough time to stop it, and he didn't stop it. But Trump's trying to make up for it with Qatar. And now, so this is seen as a response to the Israeli attack on Qatar. But I think this could also be an effort to shore up the alliance with Doha ahead of another potential war with Iran. During the 12-day war, Iran attacked the U.S.'s Al Udeid air base in Qatar in retaliation for the U.S. bombing of its nuclear facilities. And Iran gave the U.S. notice about the attack, and there were no casualties among U.S. or Qatari personnel. But in the event of another war, Iran's attacks could be more significant and likely come without warning. So they really want to kind of patch things up with Qatar if they're going to expect to be in some kind of war where they're actually really exchanging strikes with Iran, not some choreographed attack. All right, so the next one here, the U.S. Announces more sanctions on Iran to back the Snapback. So Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced on Wednesday that the U.S. was imposing more sanctions on Iran to support the UN Security Council sanctions that were reimposed after the UK, France, and Germany triggered the so-called snapback mechanism of the 2015 nuclear deal, an agreement the U.S. withdrew from back in 2018. So Rubio said that the U.S. was designating 44 individuals and entities allegedly involved in Iran's nuclear program and weapons procurement networks. The U.S. Secretary of State said that the snapback sanctions were imposed due to Iran's significant, just the nerve, like the gall of them. So he says all these sanctions are being reimposed due to Iran's significant non-performance of its nuclear commitments. But these sanctions, they came just a few months after the U.S. literally bombed Iran's nuclear facilities under a phony pretext as part of a war that was launched while they were engaged in negotiations. And Iran was willing to make a deal with the U.S. to really reduce its nuclear enrichment levels and everything. They bomb them. They make all these demands out of them after. And then they say, oh, we're putting the sanctions on. And this is because of Iran isn't living up to its commitments. What about the U.S.'s commitments? What about the U.S. commitment to the JCPOA or to negotiations or to keeping their word about, this stuff? So anyway, also on Wednesday, Russia stated that it does not recognize these sanctions. Russia saying that snapback, from our point of view, it didn't happen. They think it was unjustified, illegal, the way that it was done. So that signals, they are basically saying that they're not going to abide by the sanctions, which is kind of I haven't seen China make a statement. I got to look into it, see what China has said. China tried to stop the sanctions, But I'm not sure yet if they've said that, called them illegal and said that they're not going to follow them. But, for the Iran-Russia relationship that has really grown in recent years, these sanctions include an arms embargo and everything. So it would be kind of big if Russia did follow it. But it looks like they are not going to. All right, so the next one here, Israel has killed 103 Lebanese civilians since truce. So as Israel continues, this article was written by Jason Ditz, by the way. So this is Israel's idea of a ceasefire, and it involves only one side ceasing fire. So the UN has new data. They came out with a report, the UN Human Rights Office, that said that they have verified that at least 103 of the people killed in the Israeli strikes since November 2024, when they signed the ceasefire deal, that at least 103 people killed were civilians. And every statement, whenever Israel bombs Lebanon, they say, "Oh, we killed a Hezbollah guy." That's just what they always claim. And the overall death toll is not exactly clear. It's likely approaching 300 based on Jason's count. He's been covering this a lot. So around a third of all deaths being verified civilians. That's a lot. But this is just what has been verified by the UN. There could be more civilians among these nearly 300 people who have been killed during this so-called ceasefire. All right, so the next one here, Israel detains 2 young Palestinian children in Hebron. This article is from Middle East Eye. I mean, look at how young these children are. These are a 5-year-old boy and a 6-year-old boy who were detained by Israeli forces over claims that they were spies, over espionage claims. And this was in the old city of Hebron. They were detained for 30 minutes after they were released after intervention from Palestinian residents and foreign activists. But, I mean, again, look at this picture. These little kids crying, holding hands, with the IDF soldier standing next to them with this big rifle. It's just another example of just what the life is like, a stark example of what life is like under the Israeli military occupation in the West Bank. All right, so the next one here, U.S. troops will stay in Iraq after drawdown. So the U.S. Department of War has confirmed that U.S. troops will remain in Iraq indefinitely under a deal signed with the Iraqi government last year that called for an end to the U.S.-led anti-ISIS mission in the country. According to Stars and Stripes, a senior Pentagon official has said that the U.S. is slightly reducing its troop presence, bringing the total number of U.S. military personnel from 2,500 to under 2,000. The majority of the remaining troops will be based in Erbil in the northern Kurdistan region. The War Department official said that U.S. troops were in the process of leaving the Al-Assad Air Base in western Iraq. The U.S. will be keeping some military personnel in Baghdad who will be tasked with bilateral security cooperation. This picture is of some U.S. troops in Erbil, at the Erbil Air Base. So while the U.S. is keeping troops in Iraq, the official claimed that the drawdown was ending the forever war in the country. The official said, quote, "First, we're ending the forever war in Iraq. Second, we're shifting the burden of responsibility for combating ISIS to Iraq from U.S. and coalition forces to our Iraqi partners. We've trained them for a decade, and they have the capability to counter ISIS, and they have the will. And third, high credit to the Iraqis themselves," end quote. So the U.S., if this story sounds familiar, I mean, the U.S. has kind of done this. This is like the third time, at least, in the past few years, where there's pressure from within Iraq for the U.S. to leave, and then they enter negotiations with Baghdad, and then they come out with some deal where they're like, all right, so we're going to stay, but we're not going to be, we're not going to be involved in combat anymore. We're going to be advisors now. And then there was another deal where they literally said like the same thing, and now they're saying something similar. But they are, I believe, saying that they're officially ending the international anti-ISIS coalition, but troops are staying under a bilateral security situation, and they are withdrawing some, but it doesn't really seem to be significant. 2,500 to under 2,000, which it seems like they're keeping it intentionally vague. The reason why I wanted to cover this was because some of the reporting on this has suggested that this deal was going to lead to a full withdrawal. It was clear to me from the beginning that it wasn't, but a lot of people thought it was, so I wanted to make clear that the U.S. is not leaving Iraq. Although pulling out of the Al-Assad airbase, that one is pretty exposed. Like if there was a big war with Iran, that was a place that they would be able to hit. I don't really know much about Erbil, like what kind of defenses they have there, but the U.S. is going to stay in Iraq, and they're also staying in Syria. They have drawn down a bit there, and they're consolidating bases. But I believe the plan is to stay in the Al-Tanf garrison in southern Syria. I believe now they still have some bases in northeast Syria, but they've been closing some down and handing them over to the SDF. All right, so the next one here, after massacres, Syria's HTS labels unrest as Assad remnants. So in March, this is another one from Jason. In March, in excess of 1,300 Alawite civilians were killed by Syrian forces, chiefly along the northwest coast. In July, several hundred more Druze civilians were executed by security forces in the southwestern Suwaida governorate. Neither crackdown really ended, and killings are still reported regularly, just not on the same scale. And the result is growing disquiet among ethnic and religious minorities and opposition to the ruling Hayat Tahrir al-Sham's HTS's calls for a strong central government with heavy control over the entire country. But the calls for decentralization and the nascent insurgencies resisting the overt massacres are being branded as insurgencies by Assad-era remnant forces. So this is kind of the narrative, and we're seeing it in kind of the Arab media that's very friendly to the, very pro-new HTS government, saying, oh, there's these Assadists trying to, start an insurgency in western Syria, when this is a place where we've seen these horrific massacres. So it's just, I don't think Assad has anything to do with why people are potentially, taking up arms and trying to fight back against, what's been happening. But this is, the push really is for this strong central control and for all these other armed groups to lay down their weapons, and you can see why people are against this. All right, so the next one here, the EU plans Ukraine loan from frozen Russian funds. This one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. So the European Union is planning to provide Ukraine with a $165 billion loan to support the war effort. The loan will be backed by Russian assets frozen by Western nations. The Kremlin stated that the EU scheme amounted to theft and pledged a response. Under the plan, Ukraine would not have to begin repaying until Ukraine receives war reparations from Russia, and it's unlikely that that's going to happen. So the EU holds about $200 billion in frozen Russian assets. Some nations have already tapped into those funds to send arms to Ukraine. And this is something that we might see, is them using this. They devised this scheme for the European countries to buy U.S. weapons to send into Ukraine. And potentially that's where some of this money could go to continue the war. All right, so I left up Hegseth's speech from yesterday. So that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints. One from Rick Sterling. Will California Zionize K-12 education? One from Alexander Oakes. How America started World War III. One from David Adler. As a Jew, I sail for Gaza to help break the siege and end a genocide. One from Dan Steinbach. Crimes against humanity with impunity. And our spotlight from Nick Cleveland Stout. Israel wants to train ChatGPT to be more pro-Israel. So please go check all that stuff out. Please like and subscribe and comment and all that stuff, and follow us on social media. One thing I mention once in a while, if you listen to the podcast, especially if you listen on Apple, you could leave a rating or a review on there. That stuff helps as well. But anyway, that is it for me for today. I will be back tomorrow with some more news. Thanks for listening.